All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We got a story here, one you guys sent in, and it's really gotten people talking. Kind of viral, you know. This clash happened at a diner in Austin, Texas. And, I mean, at first glance, it just seems like, you know, another one of the stories about how divided we are, all this political stuff. Yeah. But I think if we dig a little deeper here, there's more to it. All right, there's a lot more to unpack about assumptions and what things symbolize, and if we can even talk to each other anymore in this crazy world.
Yeah. I mean, it is fascinating how this thing, seems so ordinary at first. A waitress refuses to serve a customer. He's wearing a MAGA hat. And all of a sudden, boom, it's like this huge flashpoint right in the middle of, like, everything everyone's talking about.
And to make it even crazier, you know who the customer is. It's Joe Rogan, you know, the podcast guy.
Yeah.
Huge podcast, known for, I mean, he interviews all kinds of people. And let's be honest, he doesn't shy away from, stirring things up a bit.
Yeah, Joe Rogan wearing a MAGA hat. You don't see that every day. Like, right away, it's going to be complicated. It just adds another whole layer to it.
Oh, yeah. And the stuff you sent, it really paints a picture.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't some fancy brunch place. No way. We're talking classic Austin diner, the kind of place that's packed morning, noon, and night. Regulars, tourists, everyone just drawn in by that good food, that familiar feeling, you know?
Right, you got to set the scene, right? Because that helps you understand what's really going on. Like, this diner, it's kind of like a mini version of, like, the whole world, a place where all these different people end up in the same place for a while.
And then there's Jessie, our waitress. This woman, she's not just taking orders, filling up coffee. No, she's running the whole show. Got a million things going on at once. Yeah. But always with that sharp sense of humor and, like, she doesn't take any crap from anyone. She sounds like she's in charge.
Totally. Yeah, in the stuff we've got, she's described as, like, really connected to her community, this diner. It's more than a job to her. It's her stage.
Okay, so picture it. Diner's buzzing. Coffee's brewing. Bacon sizzling. And in walks Joe Rogan with that bright red MAGA hat.
Yeah, it's like dropping, I don't know, like a lit match into a bowl of gasoline or something. Everything changes in a second.
You got that right. And the way they describe Jessie's reaction, it's immediate. Her stomach, it like clenches up. Her mind's racing. It's clear that for her, that hat, man, it means something deep. Something that really gets to her.
And that's where this deep dive, it gets really interesting. Because we're not just talking about a hat anymore, right? It's what that hat, like, stands for. For a lot of people, it's a whole set of political beliefs, stuff they're totally against. But for Jessie, it seems like it goes even deeper than that.
Yeah, the sources mention her background, working class family, working hard to get by. And she sees that hat, and it's like, to her, it means people like her, they don't matter. Like, nobody cares about folks struggling. It's like this symbol of not belonging, being left out.
Right, and that connection, it's personal. It's not just a political argument anymore. It's way more complicated than that, more emotional.
So now she's stuck. What does she do? Does she, stick to her guns, refuse to serve him, even if it means maybe losing her job, maybe causing a whole scene? Or does she just push down those feelings and, just do her job?
Classic dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do when what you believe clashes with what you're supposed to do? We've all been there in different ways, but we've all felt that pull.
And then there's a twist. Jessie, she recognizes him. Not just some guy with a hat.
Yeah.
It's Joe Rogan. The Joe Rogan. Podcast superstar, comedian, the guy who's always, making headlines, saying something.
Oh, yeah, that changes things big time. Now it's not just some random guy, right? It's someone with a platform, someone who can reach millions of people.
And in that moment, Jessie makes a decision. She refuses to serve him. And the way they describe the diner, conversations just stop. Everyone's staring. Even the cook, he pokes his head out of the kitchen. It's like one of those moments where everyone takes a breath before, something big happens.
Powerful image, right? The whole world, or at least this little slice of it, just freezes because of this clash all playing out in this, totally normal diner.
But then what happens next? That's the real shocker. Joe Rogan, he doesn't get mad. He doesn't get defensive. Instead, he's curious. He actually starts talking to Jessie, asks her to explain why she did it.
See? This is where things get really interesting. Instead of a shouting match, there's a chance for, like, a real conversation. Joe Rogan, even with his strong opinions, he's choosing to listen, to try and understand someone who clearly sees things differently.
And that one choice, just listening, it sets up everything that happens next. The diner, it explodes. Everyone's got an opinion. You got this older guy talking about tolerance and seeing past appearances. Then there's this businesswoman complaining about how everyone just jumps to conclusions. It's like all this stuff that's been bubbling under the surface just goes pouring out.
It's like that first spark, right? Sets off this chain reaction, and all this pent-up stuff, all these emotions and opinions, they just gotta come out.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
Mm.
About how divided we are. Everyone's talking, but is anyone actually listening?
That's the big question, isn't it? And that's exactly what Joe Rogan, he brings that up next. He steps in, not to, pick a side or anything, but he points out that no one's really listening. Everyone's talking, but they're not hearing each other.
He's saying that we're all so quick to judge, right? We see something, we see a label, and we decide what we think without even thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that stops us from actually understanding each other.
Really good point. Think about it, right? Every day, we're just bombarded with information, images, sound bites, all designed to, get a reaction out of us. It's easy to get sucked into that, to just react and judge. But you gotta remember, there's usually more to the story than what you see at first glance. And this is where it gets wild. Joe Rogan, instead of, getting into it with her, he does something totally unexpected. He turns to Jessie, right, the waitress who just refused to serve him, and basically says, hey, come on my podcast. Tell everyone what you think.
Whoa, that's a bold move, man. Especially with all those people watching, all that tension. You got to think, his own fans, some of them are probably not going to like that.
Oh, yeah, totally. It shows that, Joe Rogan, he's willing to have these tough conversations, even if it means, challenging his own views.
Right.
Or the views of people who like his show.
Not what you'd expect, that's for sure. So what about Jessie? How does she react to this out-of-nowhere invitation?
Well, they describe her as, totally shocked. All these emotions hit her at once, right? Shock, nervousness, and then, a little bit of curiosity. I mean, imagine going from serving tables to being on a podcast with millions of listeners. That's got to be intense.
Yeah, that's a lot to handle, especially for someone who's not, used to being in the spotlight like that.
Exactly. And you know what? She almost backed out. The whole idea of it, this huge audience, people judging her, it was almost too much.
But she didn't, right?
Nope. 2 weeks later, there she is, sitting across from Joe Rogan in his studio in Austin. Cameras are rolling, mics are on, everything's being recorded. And Jessie, the waitress from that diner, she's about to tell her story to the world.
You got to have guts to do something like that, knowing that, what you say, it might not be what everyone wants to hear.
Oh, yeah, big time. And that's what's so cool about Jessie's story, right? It shows how regular people, they can find their voice too. It reminds us that everyone has a story to tell. Everyone's experiences matter, no matter who they are or where they come from.
So what happens when the podcast starts? Does she, hold back? Does she shy away from the tough stuff?
No way. They say the whole episode is just raw honesty. Jessie, she talks about everything. Being a working class woman, the struggle she's faced, how that MAGA hat, to her, it represents how people don't care about those who are struggling.
To share that kind of stuff with all those people listening, that takes a lot of courage.
It does, and that's what makes her story so powerful, right? It's not just some political debate. It's real life. It's her life, and that lets people connect with her, human to human.
So what about Joe Rogan? How does he react to all this? Does he try to argue with her, change her mind?
Nope. He listens. And that's what's interesting. He's not trying to run the show. He's listening. He asks questions to make sure he understands. He acknowledges that, yeah, her experiences are real, her feelings are valid.
That's important, right? Listening. Sometimes it's more important than talking, especially when you're talking to someone who sees things differently. You got to create that space where you can actually understand each other, where empathy can happen.
Exactly. And even though they talk about some heavy stuff, identity politics, what symbols mean, how to bridge the political divide, there are also moments where they laugh, where they connect. It's surprising how much common ground they find.
Makes you think, even when we disagree, we can still find ways to connect. We're all human, after all.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something we seem to forget a lot these days, right? With everything so divided, so polarized.
So the podcast ends. What happens then? Does it just disappear into the internet, or does it, actually make a difference?
Well, you probably guessed it. The episode blows up, goes viral. People are talking about it everywhere, social media, news, you name it.
Crazy to think that one little thing in a diner can turn into something so big.
I know, right? It shows how powerful stories can be, how one person speaking their truth can reach so many people, start so many important conversations.
But, not everyone's going to be happy about it, right? Did Jessie get any backlash for going on the podcast?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Some people criticized her for, giving Joe Rogan a platform, saying he's dangerous or whatever. Others, they questioned her motives, like why she did it.
That's what happens, right? You put yourself out there, you speak your mind, you're going to get some pushback. Not everyone's going to like it.
Yeah, it's true. But it also shows that speaking up, standing up for what you believe in, it's not always easy. But you know what? The sources say that she got a lot of support too.
That's good to hear.
Mm.
So yeah, there was some negativity, but there were also people who appreciated her courage, her willingness to actually have a real conversation.
Absolutely. People praised her for being honest, for being vulnerable, for trying to bridge the gap between people.
So what about back at the diner? Did things change for Jessie after the podcast?
They say she was treated differently, yeah. People had more respect for her. They saw her as more than just a waitress, you know? It was like the whole community. They saw her in a new light.
It's like she became this symbol of something, right? Like it's okay to stand up for what you believe in, even if it's hard, even if people disagree with you.
Yeah, exactly. And even though going on the podcast had its downsides, it seems like it had a big impact on Jessie herself.
I'm curious about that. What were some of the big takeaways for her? What did she learn about herself, about Joe Rogan, about the world?
Well, one of the biggest things was realizing that she had judged Joe Rogan too quickly.
It's easy to do that, right?
Mm.
We all make assumptions about people. We see a little bit of information, a label, the way someone looks, and we just decide what we think about them.
Yeah, it's human nature, and that's one of the most important things this whole story shows us. Assumptions can be dangerous. They can shape how we see people, how we treat them, before we even give them a chance.
So what did Jessie learn from actually questioning those assumptions?
She learned that people are complicated. We all have different beliefs, different experiences that shape how we see the world. And sometimes, someone you think you know, like someone wearing a MAGA hat, they might surprise you. They might be willing to listen, to have a real conversation.
It's like if we just stick to labels and symbols, we miss out on seeing the whole person.
Right.
We miss out on understanding why they think the way they do.
Exactly. And that's so important now. With everything so divided, we got to move past those surface level judgments and actually connect with each other on a deeper level.
So beyond the diner, beyond the podcast, beyond all the buzz it created, what does this story tell us about the big picture? Can we actually understand each other, connect with each other, even when it seems like we're so divided?
What's amazing about the story is that it gives us hope.
I like that. It's not just about conflict and division. It's about finding a way through all that.
Right. It shows us that we can still talk to each other, even when we disagree, even when we have totally different beliefs. It's about listening, about empathy, about remembering that we're all human, even when we don't see eye to eye.
It's like we're not doomed to just fight all the time. I think we all need a little bit of that hope, right?
Yeah.
Especially these days.
Yeah, no doubt. And what makes this whole thing even more, more powerful is that it wasn't just this one-time thing, you know. Both Joe Rogan and Jessie, they did stuff to make sure it actually meant something, to make sure it had a real impact.
What do you mean?
Well, Joe Rogan, he used his platform, his podcast, to give Jessie a voice, right? He didn't shy away from the, all the controversy, but he also didn't try to make it some big, sensational thing. It seemed like he really wanted to create a space for, actual conversation, for people to understand each other.
And for Jessie, it was her chance to really explain her beliefs, her experiences to way more people than just those in the diner, right?
Exactly. And people listened. They connected with her story, especially people who, felt the same way about how divided we are. People who were tired of all the yelling and arguing, just being stuck with people who agree with them.
It's amazing, right, how something so small, refusing to serve someone because of a hat, could turn into this huge conversation about who we are, what things mean, and how important it is to just talk to each other.
That's what's so cool about it, I think. It shows that what we do, even small things, they can make a difference. They can spark change, inspire other people to speak up.
It's a good reminder that we all have a part to play, right, in making the world a better place.
Absolutely. And Jessie, she didn't stop there. After the podcast, she wrote this really powerful post on social media.
Oh, yeah. What'd she say?
She basically told everyone, listen more, judge less, treat each other with respect, be curious about people who are different from you. She talked about how she learned that assumptions can be really harmful and how she believes that talking to each other is the way to go.
It's a good message. We could all use that reminder.
Yeah.
It's so easy to, get stuck in our own ways of thinking, to judge people without really knowing them.
It's true. But Jesse's story shows us that there's always more to people than we see at first. There's always more to learn, more to understand if we just, open our minds a little.
So we've covered a lot here. But as we wrap this up, I keep coming back to, what does this mean for the person listening right now? Why should they care about a story about a waitress, a podcast host, and a MAGA hat in some diner in Texas?
Because it's not just about them, right? It's about all of us. It's about how hard it is to understand each other, to get along when we all have these different beliefs, different ways of seeing the world.
It's like we're living in a time where it's so easy to just stick with people who think like us,
Right.
to avoid anyone who disagrees.
Yeah, it's easy. It's comfortable. But it also stops us from growing, from really understanding the world and the people in it.
Jesse's story, it's like a challenge to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
To get out of our comfort zones, to talk to people who see things differently, to listen to them, try to understand them, even when it's hard.
It reminds us that that's where real growth happens. Real understanding, when we encounter ideas and perspectives that, make us think differently.
And it all starts with a choice, right? Choose to be curious, not judgmental. Choose to talk, not fight. Choose to connect, not isolate yourself.
It's not going to solve everything, but it's a good place to start. It's how we build a world where people are more understanding, more compassionate, more connected.
Something worth working towards, that's for sure.
Couldn't agree more.
So next time you're about to, just make a judgment about someone, remember this story. Think about the times you've shut down a conversation before it even started.
Ask yourself, what if I listened instead? What could I learn? Who could I connect with? What could we build together?
Lots to think about there. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.